Hey there, amazing people. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome, friends, to our video dedicated to Generation. Let's dive right in and uncover its wonders. Generation Up is the third novel by Russian author Victor Pelevin. Published in 1999, it tells the story of Babylen Tatarsky, a Moscow creative and advertising copywriter. The story deals with themes of post-Soviet Russia, consumerism, recreational drug use, and Mesopotamian mythology. An English translation by Andrew Bromfield was published by Penguin in the US as Homo Zapiens, and by Faber and Faber in the UK as Babylen. A film adaptation by Victor Ginzburg was released on 14 April 2011. TOC. Moving on to the next segment, we have list of chapters. 1. Generation P2. Draft Podium 3. Ticomet 2-4. The three riddles of Isha. Tatarsky runs into his old classmate, Giriv, and visits his home outside of Moscow. Giriv and Tatarsky consume some flygaric mushrooms. Tatarsky, hallucinating, enters an abandoned construction site, viewing it as the ziggurat he read of in Chapter 3. 5. Poor Folk 6. The Path to Yourself 7. Homo Zapiens using a Ouija board. Tatarsky summons the spirit of Che Guevara to ask him about advertising. By means of automatic writing, Guevara dictates a polemic on the nature of television, based on the thought of Buddhist teacher Siddhartha Gautama. 8. Safe Haven 9. The Babylonian Stamp 10. Weave Over 11. The Institute of Apiculture 12. Cloud in Parts 13. The Islamic Factor 14. Critical Times 15. The Golden Room. Tatarsky attends a reception in a bunker below the Ostankino TV tower. He is dressed with a mirror and a mask and taken to the Golden Room, where he looks into the sacred eye. Azodovsky is strangled. Tatarsky is declared to be ritual husband of the goddess Isha. 16. Tubog Man. In his role as husband of Isha, Tatarsky appears in innumerable television commercials. In the final scene, he is seen as the resting wayfarer in a commercial for Tubog beer. Now, let's shift our attention to characters. Babylen Tatarsky. Babylen Tatarsky. In the English translation, the hero of the story. Tatarsky is a former student of the Literary Institute of Moscow and a disillusioned poet. In Chapter 2, he meets a former classmate and becomes an advertising copywriter. His name is an acronym of Vasily Aksinov and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, giving Babylen. Hussein, a Chechen mobster who provides security at the kiosks where Tatarsky works in Chapter 2. He is addicted to opiates and Sufi music. He recognizes Tatarsky in Chapter 10, shortly after Tatarsky's hallucinogenic experience. Hussein then detains Tatarsky, but is released by Weaveover, who is his boss Kanan's protection. Sergei Markovin, a classmate from the Literary Institute. Markovin gets Tatarsky his first advertising job at Draft Podium. He appears again in Chapter 11, getting Tatarsky a position at the Institute of Apiculture. In Chapter 12, he inducts Tatarsky into the Institute's secrets. Andrei Giriv, another classmate from the Literary Institute. In Chapter 4, he introduces Tatarsky to the flygaric mushroom. In Chapter 9, he talks Tatarsky down after his LSD-induced hallucination. He supplies Tatarsky mushrooms one more time in Chapter 14. The seraph. This is a winged, dog-like dragon which appears to Tatarsky during a hallucinogenic trance in Chapter 9. Amongst other things, it claims it is guardian to the Tower of Babel. Farsak Seifel Farsakin, TV political analyst at the Institute. He inducts Tatarsky into the society in the penultimate chapter. Let's now turn our gaze towards plot and explore the fascinating connections it has to offer. The novel is set in Moscow in the Yeltsin years, the early years, a time of rampant chaos and corruption. Its protagonist, Babylen Tatarsky, graduate student and poet, has been tossed onto the streets after the fall of the Soviet Union, where he soon learns his true calling, developing Russian versions of Western advertisements. But the more he succeeds as a copywriter, the more he searches for meaning in a culture now defined by material possessions and self-indulgence. He attempts to discover the forces that determine individual desires and shape collective belief in this post-Soviet world. In this quest, Tatarsky sees coincidences that suggest patterns that in turn suggest a hidden meaning behind the chaos of life. He first senses this hidden purpose when reading about Mesopotamian religious practices. Tatarsky's quest is enhanced by the consumption of hallucinogenic mushrooms, cocaine, and vodka. His quest is further aided by another form of spirits. Through a Ouija board, Che Guevara writes a treatise on identity, consumerism, and television. Eventually, Tatarsky begins to learn some truths, for instance, that all of politics and the real events broadcast on television are digital creations. But he can never quite discover the ultimate force behind these fabrications. When at last he reaches the top of the corporate pyramid, Tatarsky learns that the members of his firm are servants of the goddess Ishtar, whose corporal form consists of the totality of advertising images. The firm's chief duty is to make sure that Ishtar's enemy, the dog fuck-up, does not awaken, bringing with it chaos and destruction. After a ritual sacrifice, Tatarsky becomes the goddess's new regent and, in the form of a 3D double, her bridegroom. In the novel's last chapter, Tatarsky's electronic double becomes a ubiquitous presence on Russian TV. Tatarsky, who had tried to look past the false images presented on TV to see a true unmediated reality, has himself been transformed into an illusion. It is explained in the epilogue that the P in Generation P stands for Generation Pizdits, which translated roughly as Generation Screwed. In this chapter, we'll be shedding light on Mesopotamian mythology and its role in shaping our understanding. Motifs from Mesopotamian mythology are widely represented in the book by various references, symbolic coincidences, and the final denouement. The most prominent image is the one of Ishtar, goddess, feminine origin related to Venus. It's the most constant and significant theme, the rest appears as a support for it. The idea beneath the motif of Mesopotamian mythology seemed to serve the purpose of deification of advertising, as in the end the most powerful media corporation appears to be a child and ill-sustaining, preserving the balance between good and evil by means of deft informational manipulations. Tatarsky's experimenting with fly agaric mushrooms, a Manita muscaria species that give him creative inspiration, also has mythological background. Fly agarics are sacred mushrooms of Ishtar, consequently it looks like the goddess inspires him. Tatarsky's name also bears a sign of symbolism. Babylen, apart from being an acronym from the names of Vasily Aksionov and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, can also be interpreted as a variation of the word Babylon, or Babylen in Russian. In this chapter, we'll be shedding light on consumerism and its role in shaping our understanding. The subject of consumerism is discussed on several levels. Conceptual level. Society is presented as a primitive abstract organism, Uranus. Uranus is a virtual embodiment of man's longing for possession. On biological level, it is equal to a multi-cell primitive mollusk. However, it is able to steer society's economical processes by means of various media and, among others, advertising. The theme of advertising creates the ground level of the novel. It depicts the mechanics by means of which one group of people stimulates consumption of goods by the other group of people, at the same time fulfilling their own demand for material values. Material level. Set in post-Soviet Russia, the image of materialistic approach to life is especially successful because Soviet attachment to things, stemming from the constant lack of material goods during the 70-year Soviet period, is incomparable to any other. Therefore, when Pelevin captured the stage of initial making up for things, a mass meant the effect turned out to be particularly powerful. The most successful image in the book is the exhibition of monetarist minimalism, an exposition of certificates issued by various auctions and art dealers confirming the price paid for this or another work of art. Drug abuse as a signifier of status. Tatarsky presents a specific approach to taking drugs as a marking point on the social level, discussed in latter chapter. With the foundation laid, let's embark on a journey into the role of drug use in the book. There are 3 drug-related themes in the book, all of them symbolizing and relating to different issues. Tatarsky's first hallucinogenic experience is eating fly agarics with his institute mate Geriv, who has turned to various kinds of esoteric and Buddhist learnings. This experience is one of the bonds tying the plot of the book to Mesopotamian mythology. Fly agaric is a sacred mushroom of Isha, the most prominent female deity, feminine origin, and also a symbol of a starry sky. In Mesopotamian cosmology, she was related to Venus, the morning star. It is said that fly agaric mushrooms were given to the contestants participants of the so-called Grand Lottery, also called the Game Without a Name, which requires that the contestant answers the 3 Chaldean riddles before he is allowed to ascend Isha's ziggurat or the Tower of Babel, and that the ascent is nothing more than a hallucinogenic trip or an effect of a muscaria-induced intoxication. In a similar manner, Tatarsky perceives that the biblical phrase mixing of the tongues, or loss of ability to understand another person's language, which the Bible interprets as a consequence of divine wrath, and the reason the Tower of Babel was left unfinished, should be understood literally as mixing of the tongue, meaning that a heavily intoxicated person appears to others to be speaking gibberish. The novel is rather unclear whether Tatarsky ingested only the Muscaria species of a Manatee family. Geriv assures Tatarsky that there are no brown ones in the tea he made, and yet, during their walk in the forest, Tatarsky picks up and ingests a brown mushroom of fly agaric in Russian, and later, during his LSD trip, he is lectured by a mythical god of the Babel Tower, Seraph, against the use of pantherine mushrooms among other substances. Since Amanita pantherina is brown in color unlike its red cousin Muscaria, and differs in its effects, it is likely the author implies that Tatarsky ingested both varieties. The other 2 experiences are juxtaposed with each other. Tatarsky's cocaine abuse signifies rather his social status than the addiction itself. Babylen himself notes that it is the price of the drug that counts, and that if glue cost $1,000 for a tube, it would be the top trend drug taken by all the celebrities. The other issue he pays attention to is the way to take it, cocaine to sniff it through a $100 bill. Thus the essence of cocaine intake is in its material value, and the status it gives you, not the physical experience itself, and what's more, physical experience of cocaine is, contrary to what it is typically described as in the literature, hardly pleasant. Tatarsky suspects that the mixture is made up of mostly worthless cut and a small amount of amphetamines rather than cocaine. LSD, on the contrary, is represented by the drug pusher, a minor personage of the novel, as a pure drug, a psychedelic that let us experience spiritual enlightenment. Acid is also a kind of transition between ancient stimulants like mushrooms and modern synthetic drugs, which combines modern technology and ancient purpose. The picture printed on an LSD blotter stamp is perceived by the dealer to influence the effects of LSD, acting similarly to an advertisement, imprinting certain associations upon the user. While tripping on 5 hits of LSD with a picture of some Babylonian-looking idol character, Tatarsky begins to see an uncanny parallel between the TV set and Chaldean altar for human sacrifice. The TV, through advertising incorporated in it, feeds the viewer to the flames of material consumption, and Tatarsky, being a copywriter, begins to see himself as a serviceman of such an inferno. The irony here is that if LSD does in fact make Tatarsky experience some form of spiritual enlightenment, then aesthetic enjoyment or clarity of thought do not seem to be among its necessary ingredients. Tatarsky experiences a rather frightening trip, at the end of which, taken over by remorse and piety, he creates a humorous yet cynical TV advertisement for none other but Jesus Christ himself. In his fantasized ad, Jesus comes out of a white luxury car as a halo of bright light from which are seen only a hand on the car's door and a foot stepping outside. The scene is accompanied by slogan "Reputable Lord for Reputable Lords." Let's now turn our gaze towards Mammon Oranus and explore the fascinating connections it has to offer. Pelevin employs a similar motif to one that belongs to William South. Burroughs, namely of one all-purpose blob as a metaphor for a society subdued to consumerism. Like Burroughs' blob, representing degradation of ordinary men and women to an organ that can fulfill their basic bodily needs. Pelevin's Oronus represent degradation of an individual to a cell in biologically, if such term can be applied to a concept primitive but at the same time powerful organism that governs our consumer habits. In order to govern and spur the constant flow of money and goods, which play a role of blood and lymph, Oronus uses media as a kind of nervous system to steer its cells' activity, namely selling and buying. What is important is that Pelevin's Oronus is built upon already existing psychological needs of consumption and defecation. When one envies and admires the way a TV character displays wealth or class, the former is displaying what Pelevin calls oral wow factor. When, conversely, one lavishly spends money or displays class for others to envy and admire, one is displaying anal wow factor. The displacing wow factor ensures that one perpetually attempts to climb the ladder of success. The author parallels this to a Babylonian myth in which human beings were created out of beads. A bead serves as an exact representation of Oronus, a human being who swallows the golden thread only to have it come out of his rear end and who in so doing ends up being suspended on the thread. In the end, we may conclude that human psyche creates a concept to which it finally subdues itself and part of which it becomes. As we progress through this video, let's shift our attention towards conspiracy theory and uncover its hidden depths. Pelevin presents rather far-fetched but not totally impossible vision of the world governed by virtual puppets created, upgraded and controlled by the media corporations. But not totally impossible should not be understood literally. Metaphorically, media puppets shown in the novel may actually represent modern authorities whose success without exception depends on media, and how those media present them to people. The idea of this metaphor lies in the concept that when we see a politician or a public activist on the TV, we see not a real person but rather an image created for the certain purpose, whether to capture attention, rouse empathy, or simply improve the rating of a political party or any other organization. Pelevin draws attention to the fact that the audience has no power to control media and the flow of information they deliver through press, television, or the internet. Now, let's redirect our focus towards features of the novel and discover its significance in our narrative. The novel was not subjected to professional editing. It was presented to the reader in the author's own edition, so in the text of Pelevin can be noticed flaws, which immediately drew the attention of critics. There are obvious stylistic errors in the text, the most common of which are tautologies, literary stamps that the author uses when moving from episode to episode. The author often uses the same epithets to describe different subjects, and the novel itself is written in non-literary language. The novel contains profanity, which is also disliked by many critics. The novel's loosely fractured composition allowed many witty replies to be inserted into the text. Many critics argue that the novel Generation P consists of a mixture of disparate anecdotes, urban folklore, American mass culture, and the language of the novel consists of gangster fling, youth slang, terminological volaplex, advertising, and PR. There are constant English language insertions in the text of the novel. The novel's stylistic foundation is a legacy of Hemingway's intellectual romance, Salinger's adapted Buddhism, the Strugatsky brothers' Isific futurology with the addition of Carsten's psychedelics, and Irving Wells' fractured ecstasy, as one Russian critic said about the novel. One of the literary devices in the novel is the incorporation of virtual reality into reality. This device is carried out by depicting the delirium of the main character after the use of drugs. The use of flies causes the protagonist's speech dysfunction, which leads the protagonist to believe that there is no absolute truth. It depends on the observer and witness of events. The novel's episode of Che Guevara's spirit summoning shows man's dependence on television and his transformation into a virtual subject. In this section, we'll be peeling back the layers of footnotes to reveal its true essence. Category Russian novels, category novels set in the Urs, category novels by Victor Pelevin, category novels set in Moscow, category Russian novels adapted into films, category Russian counterculture of the Urs. Remember to follow me on social media for behind-the-scenes content and updates.